kind of sold, or several of them actually sold JDK Flight Recorder. How many people have actually heard of or used JDK Flight Recorder before today? One? Oh, really? Okay, yeah, I hope so. So yeah, not many, but yeah, two. So yeah, no, that's kind of what I expected. But yeah, Jonathan, when he was showing this presentation on garbage collectors, really kind of showed one of the use cases for JFR, which is getting you really deep view into what's happening in the JVM, where you can compare like, oh, should I be using G1, GTC, or some other garbage collector? That is actually one of the ideal or good use cases of JFR, or of course also just general performance comparison. That's it. If you do leave with an intense desire to know more after this presentation, my team, the Java DevRel team on JBG, we run the dev.java website, so we have a lot of great information there. I think we do have a tutorial, at least a small tutorial on JFR. Also, inside.java, it's a really great location to go to for kind of what's happening within OpenJDK with the development of OpenJDK. And then we also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Java, where we post like our podcast, our newscast. I do weekly about 1 or so minutes video that kind of covers various things. In fact, I've covered JFR several times within it. And then also we have Jep Cafe by my colleague Jose, where he goes in depth on various Jeps and other topics. Actually, if you're really wanting to know more about Loom, which is where we're actually seeing some of our first features being included as a mainline, granted as preview and incubator features, he has some really great presentations or great videos kind of going through explaining Loom and how to use it, and of course the significance of it. With that said, though, let's actually learn about JFR. So the agenda: what is JDK Flight Recorder? And then we're going to look at configuring and using JDK Flight Recorder, analyzing results, custom events, and a few other things as well. Most of the rest of the part are really, after the first part of explaining JFR, is really going to be all live demos. So what is JDK Flight Recorder, or as I will literally be calling it from now on, just JFR, because JDK Flight Recorder is a lot to say constantly. So it's not really new. It goes all the way back to JDK 7, and even before that, and at the time it was called Java Flight Recorder. So if you've heard sometimes Java Flight Recorder or JDK Flight Recorder, essentially it's the same thing. Just back in JDK 11, it was open source and then renamed to JDK Flight Recorder. And it's just no longer a commercial feature that you have to pay a license to use in production. But it goes all the way back to the JRocket days. And really the reason why it was initially developed is that when customers would maybe say like, oh, hey, we're seeing some sort of issue, like some sort of performance issue, well, they can only maybe be kind of vague. And that's obviously not that helpful to JDK engineers. So it was both part developed as a way for getting better information from customers on tracking down performance or bugs or things like that. And it's actually even dog-fooded by the JDK engineers when developing new features or working on various projects. So like certainly these GDC engineers are using JDK Flight Recorder to say like, okay, if we make this change, are we actually, improving pause times or whatever performance metric they're looking at? Our own engineers are actually using JFR for a lot of their work as well. So it's not just this thing that's kind of off to the side by itself. But the other nice thing is it's built right into the Java runtime, right into the JDK. So you don't have to go out and get some other separate artifact and then include it in. It's always right there. But what it is fundamentally, it's an event-based diagnostic and profiling tool. But one of the really key benefits of it, it has an extremely low overhead. If nothing else, one of the major takeaways you want from this presentation is that really you should consider using it in production, like right now, because like on the default settings, its overhead is less than 1%. So you can always just have it running in production. So if some production issue comes up, it's always there to go back to get that recording to kind of figure out what's going wrong, because you don't want to have that issue that came up, every once a week or every few days or just some infrequent event. And then, oh, okay, you forgot to have it on then you go turn it on, then it doesn't ever happen. No, you can always have it continuously running. And it's covering both events that's happening within the JVM itself, and then of course your application running on top of it. Like I said, the 1% or less is based on default settings. If you use different settings, of course, your monitors might vary. If you significantly increase the stuff of what you're looking for, that could have an impact. One of the biggest impacts, performance impacts, is by increasing how much of the stack you're actually capturing. That's going to have the most impact on the potential performance impact from using Jfr. But a little bit more in the hood, like I said, the events that are both produced by both the Java runtime and your application, and they're stored in local thread, local buffers. So that's kind of how it is able to have such a low performance impact. And then these can be dumped to Jfr files for reading, and they are very compact files, so they take up as little storage space as possible. So as of Jdk 17, I think there's already over 150 events, and they are always constantly adding new events with every Jdk release. Going back again to Jonathan's presentation, and I think a couple other presentations, how they brought up how finalize is being deprecated. It was deprecated for removal with Jdk 18. That's actually an event you can use within Jdk or Jfr is to track where finalize might be used. You're probably not using it within your own application itself, but it could be being used in some sort of library. So you can actually have that turned on to actually see where that is being, or if that's being potentially used by your application. You can find out maybe where, and then maybe upgrade that dependency if it is being used, because there is, as Jonathan noted, a number of performance issues involved with that, and also kind of preventing them from things like Project Valhalla from being able to be fully adopted. With that said, let's actually get into the demo portion. So yeah, simply put, I'm just using the Spring Boot Pet Clinic app just to kind of demonstrate this for a little bit. And so to start Jfr, you can start it at the application startup, and you would use the VM argument start flight recording, and then you could give it the name of the recording that you're going to have it be written to. In this case, I'm doing dump on exit, so whenever I quit the application, then it will automatically then dump all the recording information to the file I named it. There is a lot more options available here, and I do have links at the end of this presentation on more information on that. But with that said, let's go ahead and copy that. And always keep a cheat sheet, handy whenever you're doing live demos, just so you're not accidentally making a mistake on like missing a letter or something, and then you're just like furiously trying to figure out what's going wrong. But yeah, we can see this. Don't want to do that one. Don't want that infinite mirror going on. Oh yeah, of course. So yeah, said just going to do a few little things here just to generate a little bit of activity. Not that it's really necessary, or getting plenty just from doing the startup itself. And so with that, we do see how, is the text big enough for like people in back, or do you need to make it bigger? Bigger? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Is that good, or bigger still? Bigger? Okay. Is that good enough, or? Okay. Let's just do a couple a little bit smaller. All right. Let's do that again. So yeah, here is a recording file I just created. And so one of the best tools, and again, this is actually something Jonathan showed a little bit earlier. Jonathan unfortunately spoiled my entire presentation unknowingly. But yeah, Jdk Mission Control is a good way, as Jonathan showed, of kind of getting a holistic view of what is happening within your application. You can kind of see, maybe areas of where performance isn't doing so great. But yeah, it gives you pretty detailed information just out of the box, just with default settings as to what's going on within your application. You can see when memory dumps are happening, overall performance and stuff. Very detailed information. Actually, my background is very much just as a web developer. I never often had to be too concerned when it came to performance issues. So I'm still kind of getting used to myself how to properly interpret some of these areas. I can obviously interpret the memory dumps, but or the garbage collections, but could use a little bit more work here on interpreting some of this. But one of the really nice things though is, so let's just say that actually instead of starting Jfr up with your application at startup, you already have a running application that for some reason you just didn't start it up, and like maybe you're starting to notice like some sort of performance issue, or you just wanted to start checking performance on the application. And so, you might initially think like, oh man, like I'm going to completely restart this application to then actually start Jfr up with it. Actually, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. So you might initially kind of think like, okay, I'm going to have to restart this application and then start up Jfr with it. But actually, luckily, that isn't the case. Is you can actually, so if I can figure out, in this case, this application is running process ID 4409. You can actually start up Jfr on an already running application. Using the J command. So here, yeah, so now the Jfr is running on this application I already started. Now, of course, I've lost all the information from before, like the startup of the application. So when I stop this application, there's going to be very little in this data recording. But still, that's obviously much better than having to completely restart your application just to start up Jfr, especially something in flight. And you can also command using J command to perform a dump. Like you don't have to wait until your application, like you don't have to stop an application to then get a recording out of it. You can actually dump an in-flight recording. So let's see, yeah. So again, yeah, here's the much smaller recording, as you can kind of see here from just the, obviously nothing happening because I didn't do any activity within the application going on. So nothing really show here, but all the same, you can dump out without having to restart the application. Yeah, well, not a whole lot of point in showing this here though, but I was going to demonstrate also then how by changing the garbage collectors, you can actually then see the difference in performance. But again, Jonathan, once again, unknowingly kind of stole my thunder. But, you showed how like when it's like the serial, how it went up and up and then stopped and, dumped everything. Parallel was a little bit more jagged and so on. So again, that is a good demonstration of where Jfr is helpful, or of course, maybe not necessarily just comparing garbage collectors, as that isn't, necessarily going to be something going to be changing often, but where you could be checking to see like, okay, you're having some sort of performance issue. So you go in, refactor some code. You can kind of see, compare recordings between the two, if you run a load test and to see, okay, does a change that you made improve performance otherwise, because otherwise that can be very difficult to figure that out if you're just kind of doing some guesswork or doing timing at some sort of very high level. There could be a lot of factors kind of going on as to whether or not it's the change that improved it, or there's something else happening that could have changed the performance of it. But you can also add it in JDK 14 or 15 was the ability to do streams out of a live application. So it's not always, so like right now, or at least before, you would have to do a dump to get information out of your application, and having to do that dump every single time, is pretty coarse grained and also kind of limited the potential benefits of and usages of JFR. With JFR, JDK 14 or 15 doesn't really matter since neither one are valid or should be used in production anymore. But there was Jfr Streams added. So in this example, this is using a Java agent to then write to the console kind of this current behavior of what is happening within the application. So we can see, this is just one example, but yeah, you can show like the CPU usage, the physical memory, and this is being, in this case also like it shows the garbage collector. This is mostly a primarily a demonstration, not necessarily something you would want to actually be using in production, as it's providing a lot of information that's probably not needed. But I can easily show just with the size of what we're running to be. But yeah, we can, if I was to have this on a separate screen to actually show it, you could see how like the CPU usage and all that stuff is changing as I work with the application. And we're also seeing, methods and all that stuff being most used. But where this could be more useful, instead of just, a very in-depth dashboard, could also be used, like it could be checking for memory, CPU use, and stuff like that for within like something like Kubernetes to say when you should be spinning up an additional pod or potentially spinning down additional pods if you're getting below a CPU usage or memory usage percentage. Then you might be like, okay, we don't need any more, or we can reduce the number of instances to, of course, save on money. So that could be where it's very useful for doing streaming. Jdk Mission Control is really great for providing a high level of what is happening within your application. But if you're already kind of having a pretty good idea of what's going on, the Jfr tool, command line tool, can also provide a simpler way of kind of drilling down to what is happening within your application. In this case, this is giving an overall summary of what happened within this recording, how many of these different events occurred within the recording, and then the amount of data being collected about those different events. But then we can also drill down a bit farther. So like maybe I'm just curious like how often threads are starting within the application. And then this filters down to show every different thread start that's happening within the application. So this could be good if maybe you're thinking you have thread leaks or something like that. You could use this to drill down to see whenever a thread new thread was started. You can also filter by categories. Actually, I don't want to do. Should be one. So yeah, if I wanted to see all the different events that are happening that have related to GCing, I can also see that. So another thing is that out of the box, I mentioned that there's already over 150 events, and I don't know if I covered, but like there's like 160 to 170 events now by JDK 19 occurring, but that may not necessarily capture all that you're caring about, in which case you can actually create your own events as well. And simply to do that, what you would do is you would extend Jdk Flight Recorder event. So yeah, you just extend this class, and that's actually fundamentally all you have to do to create your own events. Now, for the fields that can be valid within the event type, they can be any of the primitive value types. So int, double, long, and byte, char, and so on. Or it could be string. Any other field you have within its events that is not of those types will just be silently ignored if you pass any information to it. There's also a lot of metadata you can add to it, and you definitely want to kind of focus on adding metadata. So in this case, I have like PII, so like, okay, this event type might be capturing personally identifiable information, it's business, and it's also maybe being captured critical events. But definitely this category, this label, and name, these are all fundamentally just metadata information, but you definitely want to take advantage of those so that way you can both filter and then categorize kind of where these events are happening. If you kind of just don't put any time actually into, maybe providing good categories or event names or something like that, then, what you're looking for might be difficult to find for yourself, or of course, someone else within your organization or someone else coming after you who's maintaining that application that you helped build. But okay, so you have your own event type, and to actually then use it, so then you would new that event type, and then you would call begin on it, and this begins the timing on it within it. And then, you would run whatever events and behavior that you're going to have that you're wanting to check upon. And then at the end, you would call commit. And of course, here also I have like a field that I want to set to it, which will then be persisted to the recording. But yeah, fundamentally, all you need to do is call begin and commit. And while I realize this might look like a lot of code, it's actually super, the overhead on it is extremely low. And if this event type was disabled, the JIT will actually just simply ignore all this code. Like it will just actually take it out of the code that's actually being executed. So the overhead impact as far as performance is concerned is actually completely none at that point. So that is also one nice thing, is that while it does look a little busy in the way it looks in the code, the actual performance is very minimal from actually putting these events within your code, at least as far as the begin and commit is concerned. Of course, depending upon what you're actually doing with it, there could be a performance impact. But to show what this would look like then, here is a cheat sheet. So one nice thing that was added in Jdk 18, so that comes with Jfr, there is a default settings, which, as I mentioned, has the less than 1% overall overhead, and there's also a profiling settings as well. And these are XML files, and they're pretty complex to look at. And they're also kind of complex to configure. And so before, probably, how many organizations are doing that, like, maybe you would put together your own custom configuration file. But then because it's so complex and so involved to put together, you create one that's, whatever the default one that you want to use for your organization. And then you may copy and paste across like other applications on how to change it. And that can obviously end up being a case where you have a bunch of just extra information within there that you no longer need, that's just in there because, like, okay, well, that works. So adding in Jdk 18 was a configuration wizard that can actually step you through how to create a new configuration file. So in this case, I am going to do the interactive version of it. And it's going to give you, it's 12 questions asking you how you want to have the configuration file to look. And you can simply press enter to use the default. And so it always tells you, okay, so normal is the default. And so for most of this, so really I'm just going to do normal for all this stuff, or the default for all this stuff. But we can, see here, let's see. Yeah, like method profiling, we set that to higher. That's like, those are the areas where it could be significantly more overhead from doing that. And I think from like the stack is another area. Yeah, stack allocation and like deep reading and all that stuff is another area where that could, again, have a pretty significant performance impact. But what's also nice is so going through this interactive wizard for creating a new configuration file could be a bit much every time. So you're also able to just pass values directly to it to also configure how you want your file to look. Oh, actually, sorry. First, let me actually open up. Let's give it a few seconds to open. So yeah, fundamentally, it's a JFC file, but it's obviously just all XML. And this is what I was talking about, that it's nearly 2 or just over 1,000 lines just using the most default of settings. So that was a bit of an issue, that it was very difficult to write your own custom one. It would often end up being a bunch of copy and pasting based upon an existing file, which can obviously end up leading to like a lot of CRUD just being added in there, that people are just, add some values in there and just leave them in there just because, it worked without necessarily if it provided any value, or could actually obviously be an issue as well. But in this case, though, I did create a new event type. And let's see, make sure. Yeah, oh, my event name. So also when you create a new, okay, that's what I have. So when you create a new event type, unless you explicitly provide a name for it, in this case, I'm providing my event name, then it will use the fully qualified class name to create the name of that event. In this case, I'm setting it to 0 seconds. So also, so like here, this threshold, it's currently 0 seconds. So that obviously means everything would be captured. But let's say you're doing performance testing and you're maybe checking several different methods to say like, okay, I think, these 3 or 4 methods, they might be where performance issues are occurring, or they only intermittently have performance issues. You don't necessarily then want to capture those events or those methods every time where you may be having performance issues. You maybe only care if it's taking more than 10 milliseconds to actually, execute. So if that was the case, you would set this threshold to 10 milliseconds, and then here, so between the begin and the commit, if it took less than 10 milliseconds to execute that, then Jfr would simply ignore that event and throw it out, because that's just not what you're looking for in that example. But that's a good way of being able to easily filter out information without getting a bunch of information in there that you just don't really care about. All right, so I added so I can this event type to my custom JFC file, so it will actually then be captured when I'm running the application. And so in this case, then when starting it up, I would provide my own settings file, my custom JFC file that I just created. I will run that. Oh, I was already running another one. Yeah. And then also here at the start of the application, it will actually, in this, where is my cursor? Well, you can see it's running jcommand. If I was to do jcommand 78448, then I can do a dump on it. So it's just giving you a hint on how to actually use that if you wanted to as well. All right. Recording. All right. Yep. One second, let me rerun this. I thought it should have fired off one of those events, but it didn't. But I know how to make sure that should run. All right. So actually, one thing I also wanted to show is this can also show, like, let's say you're having a potential memory leak issue. Like this could kind of show you maybe how, like in this case, if you look at the, man, too many windows open at this point. Yeah. At the very, obviously named leak memory endpoint, that is creating a bunch of integers that are at the that can't be killed. That's a bunch of zombie integers. So really, you should never. Ints are very, very, very lightweight. So like rarely should they ever be taking up a significant amount of the heap. But here they're taking up about 10 megabytes. So that could be a way if you're suspecting you have like a memory leak issue. This can be an area you can come to look to see if you have something that looks like it's taking up a bit too much memory or too much of the heap space than what it should be. Yeah, for most, you can see the top is here is string builder, and then byte. And actually something that Aurelia was talking about in the previous presentation is the compact strings. So by default, strings like the underlying, it uses a byte to store the information. So usually strings are going to be taking up the, most of your heap, are going to be at the top of the heap and usage. So this isn't unusual to see so much information being taken up by strings here. But let's make sure. I think my event should have executed. Okay. I think messed up the recording file on it. So I am just going to hit the easy button. So this will forcibly always have it be enabled unless it's explicitly disabled by the recording file or my settings file. And run it one more time. All right. Well, that is sometimes the problems with not always or with running live demos. Things just don't want to work for you. But this event browser, well, I should be having hopefully multiple events types up here from what I just created, but it does not capture in it. I'll have to figure out why, but I'm not going to continue trying to debug it up here. But then, so like this is a good way for potentially digging down into kind of your different event types to see what is happening, what is going on with the application. Or of course, obviously, if you have custom events, you can dig down just to kind of see what is happening with them. And ideally, like this should have been under multiple folders saying like, okay, PII, business, critical, as a way of also kind of filtering down to different categories of event types. Again, one of the importance of also taking advantage of that metadata, because if you just, again, kind of just carelessly just say like, oh, okay, all my custom event types in one area, then it can be very difficult to kind of, easily interpret what is happening within your application. Another advantage, though, of also being very good at these categories that actually just came with JDK 19, like in this example, I have PII, again, for personally identifiable information, sensitive information, is previously you could only just share the recording file as a whole, and it was using a custom binary format, so there's no real easy way to actually go into that recording file and potentially remove sensitive information. By hand. But now there is the new Jfr Scrub Utility that was added in JDK 19 that can actually allow you to do that. And so to do that, there's multiple ways. So you can do, in this case, I actually would want to. So you can have it to where you could either only include certain event types. So in this example, I would say only any event types that are, garbage collector event types do I want to then have included. And in this example, if I was to run this with my recording file, it will then create a file recording scrubbed. And if we go into that, that is not the one I wanted. So by default, if you don't provide a file name to have it be exported to, then it will just automatically append scrubbed to the name of the recording file that you're applying the scrubbing to. But you can see here is that like no information is located in any other places besides garbage collection because I scrubbed everything out or only included GC events in this recording file. And you can also have it go the other way. You can exclude certain event types. So like I showed before, if my event was actually being included in that, because I had the category of PII in here, any event type with PII on it would be excluded from that recording file. But yeah, that can be very helpful because like that was one issue we were getting back from customers is, maybe they were putting their own custom event types in there. They were capturing some fields that, could be identifiable or otherwise sensitive, like there could be passwords or something like that was being captured. And there was no easy way to scrub that information out and then be able to share that recording file with a less trusted source to kind of figure out, like, maybe giving it back to engineers at OpenJDK saying like, hey, we're seeing like a performance issue, but not wanting to provide keys or passwords or anything like that. So the new Scrub utility was added. One of the actual nice things is, even though this was added in Jdk 19, you can actually scrub recordings from older Jdk versions. So if you're on Jdk 17, you should be able to scrub events out of that as well. You don't have to be upgraded Jdk 19, running on Jdk 19 to be able to actually use the Scrub utility. So that is really nice there as well. So yeah, that is mostly it. A lot of follow-up links, so you can actually look at the code example I was using at this GitHub link. I get my GitHub repo. For more information on the Jfr or the start flight recording command, as I mentioned, there's a bunch of more configuration fields that I didn't really get into. You can check out here. I actually need to update the links to be all Jdk 19. A whole rules section only barely touched upon is there's a whole programmer's guide or a whole lot of APIs also with Jfr. So I touched a little bit on that with the streaming, a little bit with the event types. There's also a programmer or API for doing scrubbing as well. So there's a lot of that is very helpful. The Jfr Health Report, that is when I was showing the Java agent to show the live feed with streaming into the Jfr. One of our Jdk engineers put that together, and so you can check out what that looks like. One other thing to note with streaming, there's a lot of different ways you can stream the information. You can stream to disk, you could stream to like over JMX. How you actually choose a stream could have impacts also on overhead. Like JMX would have more of an impact on overhead than maybe streaming to a Kafka stream or something like that. So that's also one thing to keep in mind when wanting to do that. If you're kind of running in Kubernetes or in containers and stuff like that, this is a really good link that kind of showed how one organization was using Jfr to do profiling within a Kubernetes cluster. And one last thing I also didn't touch on too much is Jfr could also be very useful when it comes to unit testing, obviously from the performance perspective. There's actually a library out there called Jfr Unit that has a lot of pre-built utilities for doing this, but you don't even need to use Jfr Unit to do that. But again, that could be very useful for unit testing or just automated testing. Is if you want to maybe catch performance regressions in certain areas, you could be capturing these events and then checking them out within a unit test to see if like, okay, the performance level is improving or there's some sort of regression. So that's also very helpful as well. And it's also one of the things is that performance testing can be very difficult because, like, let's say you're communicating with a database in a development region, maybe that database is located in the same region as where the application is. But in production, maybe they're in two separate regions, in which case that performance test in a development region is no longer really valid. At least when relying on Jfr, all that really matters is that you're using the same Jdk version between your development region and your production region. As long as that is the same, then the results should be the same between them as well. So I guess with that said, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, We're going to have some beers here in a few minutes. Yeah.
If you don't know where a memory leak may be, and you can create an event. How can you pinpoint exactly where may be?
The stack. So the stack would be the way you would do that. And actually, let's see. Get in here. Oh, not that one. Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't really touch on that. So here, and I do apologize, that's going to be a bit small for the people in back. And my computer is doing a whole lot of thinking. Give them one moment. Okay. Well, for some reason, there's a couple of issues within Jdk Mission Control, and hopefully there should be a new version of Jdk Mission Control 8.3 that should be released here before the end of the year that hopefully fixes this issue. And I think this is something that can also be fixed with a change to the settings file, which I forgot. But it should show a stack trace in here that shows like where like these those types are being created. And actually, if I was to go and to show with like the Jfr utility I was showing earlier, let's see, let's go back up a few more. Okay. I'm obviously not showing that event type, but our I think I have an example just now offhand, but that information is still actually being captured in the Jfr file. There's just an issue within JD command, and you can actually use the Jfr utility to actually still be able to see that stack trace to say like, okay, why am I having so many like JDBC connections being created, or some other, kind of obvious object that you shouldn't have like, perhaps millions of. You can drill down within the Jfr utility to see like, okay, yeah, we're seeing like it's being created a lot within this method or these series of methods to kind of figure out where a memory leak, a thread leak, or some other resource leak is occurring. Any other great question though? I forgot to show that. Any other questions or? Yes.
Like if we are suspicious that there is a problem in production, can we turn on this service and leave it for a couple of hours?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there should never be some sort of increasing performance issue or anything like that. You can configure it to set up to like have it dump like every, like at certain recording file sizes or time based or something like that to say, yeah, turn it on, have it dump to some location, every 5 minutes or whatever, whatever makes sense to kind of see, like, yeah, okay, you can, track down a performance issue. But yeah, that's also, again, one of the nice things is that like you're starting to notice a performance issue or something. You don't have to restart it. You can just, use the Jfr utility or the J command utility to start up on it as well. Any other questions? All right. Well, if not, also I'll be here as well, and you can feel free to come up and ask me. So, all right. Thank you, everyone.